Thanks for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine.
This podcast is brought to you in partnership with Noma Cork by Vinventions. Driven by a commitment to innovation, the new plant-based Noma Cork Green Line offers significant improvements in wine closure performance. Thanks to a rigorous oxygen ingress rate, you can decide which cork is best for your wine, whether it's for young and fresh wines or for those with ageing potential.
After a degree in economics, Gordon Newton Johnson decided he didn't want to go to work in a suit and tie. Instead, he joined a new wine business that his father Dave had set up in the cool climate Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. Over the last 25 years, he's helped to turn Newton Johnson Vineyards into a South African first growth, making some of the country's best Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs, while remaining one of the wine industry's true gentlemen. Hey, Gordy, how are you?
Hi, Tim. All good, thanks. Great to be here. Yeah, it's a very hard and fast start to the winter. We're in May, which in the past has actually been, usually get some nice kind of Indian summer days in May, and it's bloody cold at the moment. So it's actually been a great start to the winter.
Don't tell me that, because I arrive in South Africa this weekend.
Yes, I know. We've had buckets of rain. The rain hasn't stopped since the harvest.
Oh, man. And where are you right now? You're at the winery in the upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, yeah?
I'm in the upper Hemel-en-Aarde. I'm in the winery in my office. It's nice and quiet. There's no kids to pull pranks on me, so all good.
The Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. But let's start with where you were born, because you weren't born in the Cape. You were born in Durban, which it's too humid to grow grapes there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Durban is kind of semi-tropical. I kind of remember as a kid as well, is that, I mean, you just throw an avo pip or banana pips, or, we had avos and mangoes and papayas growing in the garden. So it's definitely not for wine. There's a bit of wine. There's a bit of vineyard up in the Midlands, which is a little bit high altitude, but it's also a summer rainfall region, so not ideal.
And you moved to the Cape when you were, 6 years old?
6, yeah, just as I was starting school.
And do you remember the move from Durban to the Cape?
I did, because it was quite a change. Obviously, growing up in KZN, they call it the last British outpost. So there's not many Afrikaners there, except for one good friend of mine, Hannes Storm. He's a rare Afrikaans Italian. So going to the Cape, I was kind of confronted with Afrikaans for the first time. When I was young in Natal, we were playing more soccer than anything else. And then all of a sudden, he has this big game rugby in our faces. It was very different. I was wearing closed shoes. I used to wear sandals to school. So yeah, it was all very different.
I mean, your dad, Dave, is Dave, not David. He developed this interest in wine through, I think, the Durban Wine Society. Then he got a job with Stellenbosch Farmers Winery. I mean, is he pretty much self-taught as well as self-made in wine, Dave?
No, he did study a little bit for it. I think his love for wine started in the early 70s, and he and Felicity, my mom, were tasting around. And he met quite a few of the winemakers back then already, and had started working for Stellenbosch Farmers Winery in the early 70s. And he said, he did a few courses in wine. There wasn't really much around available, just a couple of the corporates, and Gilbeys and distillers had a little course that you could do. And even at one point, and I only learned this the other day, is that he was even thinking of going to the UK and maybe carrying on his studies there, and with the MW studies. And that's when Dave Hughes got hold of him and said, "Listen, we're starting this Cape Wine Academy, and we're going to start this new qualification, the Cape Winemakers. Not Cape Winemakers Guild, the Cape Wine Master." And he opted for that, and. So he was originally based in Cape Town. My mom is from Ladysmith in Natal, so he met her, and they'd moved out there with Bevan. Bevan had been born, and I was born in Natal.
Empire, really.
Yeah, I mean, kind of grew on him because the reason for us moving over to the Cape was he was transferred by SFW, so he went to go work in Stellenbosch. And then really it just started to grow. And, I think he got quite tired of the corporate life and went off on his own. And he eventually started his own little Negociant wine brand, and also helped a lot of his winemaker friends with their first exports. Guys like Neil Ellis, Jan Boulankutsia, Bram van Velden, those guys.
So, he's an innovator, and also a bit of a maverick, your dad, isn't he? I love your dad. He's great fun. He's always around the winery, even today.
Yeah, he is. I mean, he's always got a plan going, and he's the best one-man team. He kind of will go off and go off and do something or some idea. I mean, at one stage he had a business making wooden wine boxes, packaging as well, so the smart boxes, because he's still, even today, very much into his woodwork. And then, I think what a really great break for him was hosting the first MW trip down to South Africa, which I think was 95 or 96. And he got a lot of contacts from that visit, and obviously a lot of inside info into the British trade, and started his own Negociant wine brand. And it's our whole story is kind of morphing from one different business to another, Negociant brands, and later a supermarket brand, and then making small bits of Newton Johnson came later, and here we are today, and that's our sole focus.
Valley, I think it was 1995, so just after the return of democracy. I just wondered, what attracted them to the region, because that was quite risky at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think it was a few years after he'd become a Cape wine master. He wrote his thesis on Pinot Noir. He loved Pinot Noir. And, also back in the day, in the 80s, you could buy Burgundy for relatively cheap. It was affordable. So, they drank loads of Burgundy. He loved it. And I think he was really interested in the start of Pinot in South Africa. It kind of had its origins in Stellenbosch with a couple of places, but it was really when Tim Hamilton Russell came down to Hemel-en-Aarde and really, that I think was the real start for Pinot. So, I think at the time he was just wanting to get a good place close to the sea. Also, number one important thing, he didn't want to give up his water culture, and build a home for his Negociant brand, and then plant a little bit of vineyard, and then see what happens.
I mean, you, meanwhile, had been studying economics at Stellenbosch University, not wine, yeah? So you hadn't caught the wine bug, but then you decided, didn't you, that you didn't want to wear a suit and tie. And so how did you actually morph back into wine? Had your dad started to do stuff under his own brand by then? Not just the Negociant brand, but Newton Johnson prototype hadn't started, had it really?
No, it hadn't started. It hadn't started until I came onto the scene. And it's true. Up to the age of about 20, I was totally oblivious as to a possibility of a career in the wine industry. But I had more artistic leanings. I did a business degree, but I did well in the degree, but I didn't enjoy it very much. And in my last year, I was just finishing off a few credits, and my dad said, "You're not going to sit on your ass. You go do something." And that's where his good friend Walter Finlayson was starting up a new project. Was called Slaley, and then got Ben Radford in, an Aussie, to come and make the wine. So that was kind of my first introduction, was just spending time in the cellar with Ben, and it was great fun.
Burgundies, at least, I hope, no?
No, I was drinking the Burgundies. Whether they were appreciated or not, I'm not too sure. But I mean, our youth was kind of spent with my dad and his friends and wine soirees, and kids running around and bringing bottles to the table and watching the guys taste, and so we were immersed in that. And if I could take something away from being a youngster, was just, what a great bunch of people the wine industry was. It was different. It was a different kind of business, and that
or something.
exactly, yeah.
I think you made the right choice. Listen, tell us about this place you're in, this region, the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley. I mean, especially it's now got these three different sub-regions. It's got valley, it's got the upper Hemel-en-Aarde Valley, and it's got the ridge. Is it a cool climate? Tell us about the ocean influence, soil types. What makes it special and what makes the bits different?
Well, it is one of the rare cool climates in South Africa, which tend to be the little places either you're going for altitude or it's hugging along the coast somewhere, because our biggest influence is the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Benguela current that from the Southern Ocean that brings us cold water up to the Cape. So the valley is basically perpendicular to the coast. It starts at about 2 kilometers from the ocean and stretches all the way till about 9 kilometers. And, during the summer, mostly, we've got a lot of southerly winds. During the winter, we've got a lot of westerly winds, but the southerly winds really bring in those cold temperatures off the sea and up the valley. So you often have these kind of tablecloth decked conditions within the valley, overcast, quite cool. So I always talk about over the mountain towards Stellenbosch is that you get this buildup of cloud. And, on any given day, we can at least be 10 degrees cooler than, say, if you go drive 20 minutes inland. So I think that's really important. I think it's probably our biggest attribute is being cool enough for Pinot. And then with regards to the appellations, when we formed them, originally only wanted one appellation, but the geologists and all the climatologists came back and said, there are a couple of marked differences. So at the beginning of the valley, you've got the lowest part, altitude anywhere between 50 and 100 meters. That's where Hamilton Russell and Bouchard-Finlayson is, where they're only on the northern face. So in the southern hemisphere, the warmer slope for us in this hemisphere. And they've got this big bank, this largely homogeneous piece of Bockerfeld shale, these sedimentary soils, quite heavy in clay, very, very clay rich. So they bring out quite structured wines from that end. And then you climb up a little bit into the upper Hemel-en-Aarde, where we are, Restless River. We've got our neighbors, Harsha next door, where the valley is actually bisected by the Onrus River. And we've almost got an equal expanse of north-facing and south-facing vineyard. And we've got farms on both, and they're quite interesting comparisons between those two. And then where the upper is quite special as well is the granite soil. If we take the whole area around us of the overbuild, there's just this sea of Bockerfeld shale soils. And where you find granites is mostly along the west coast, bits of Stellenbosch, western ends of Stellenbosch up into the Swartland. And you've got this small little outcrop, over the Cape Fold Mountains our way. So that's what makes upper Hemel-en-Aarde quite distinctive. And then going a little bit further up, our altitudes are anywhere between 200 and 300 meters. And then you climb a little bit more into the Hemel-en-Aarde Ridge at the furthest end, the most inland end, also the highest altitude. I think they've got vineyards anywhere between 200 and 400 meters. And their landscape is also quite different. They've got all these undulating hills and lots of different little aspects as well. But then again, you get more into the structured wines as well from the clay soils of the Bockerfeld shale. Yeah. And it's, I think you have to be quite clever where you plant as well, because it's not homogeneous. You get some places where it's just sandstone from the mountains around us. There's all eroded down. And but there is where you do find the original granite bedrock That's our clay bank. We've got these duplex soils where we've got topsoil up to about 1 meter deep until you hit this clay bank. It was quite nice when the vines really go down looking for nutrients and water, and that's a great buffer for the vines.
I mean, you mentioned you decided you didn't want to be an accountant or be a businessman, no suit and tie. You joined this sort of burgeoning family business 1997. You were running this 3-hectare vineyard. You're working the cellar alongside Bartow Eckstein, famous Bartow Eckstein. I mean, you learning on the job. Has that had its advantages that you haven't had a formal training in a way? Do you think it makes you a different kind of winemaker?
I think you're right. It's definitely different for me. I think it was the best way for me to learn, kind of on my own terms. I think it allowed me to be a bit of a freer thinker with wines as well. And, every now and again you come across a winemaker where you can see they almost bogged down by the academics and the dogma and the ideology of being an academic. So, I bumped my head a lot of times with wines, but it kind of makes you think a little bit freer, maybe try something different. And, if you can't do it, I don't know, you find a way.
And Dave always encouraged that, did he? Just to get on with it?
Yeah, he is. I mean, he never pushed me into it at all in the beginning. It was totally my own choice. But obviously, I think he loved it when I joined, that I was interested, and that I was so enthusiastic. So, straight after university, I joined them at what we call Cape Bay, the old winery, and they were still busy building the building. I was doing carpentry, making stairs, looking, bringing in tanks, and just kind of getting used to everything, and planting vineyard as well. We planted our first vineyards in 97, and then we started buying a little bit of grapes from all around, even far afield as Wellington, and started making a bit of wine. So that was the beginnings of Newton Johnson, was just this, making a bit of wine on the side.
You were in Marlborough with Hunters, and you worked in Bordeaux with the Sichels. Were those formative experiences for you as well?
I think yes, in the sense that it exposed me to a lot of, the wine industry that was very, very different out there, very different from what I knew here in South Africa. With all the winemakers I worked with, I might not have agreed with, I was anyway too young, but agreed with everything that they said. It didn't all make sense to me, but I kind of took snippets, and after a while you kind of put them together and eventually built your own philosophy. Yeah.
You mentioned the Negociant business your dad set up, I think, Cape Bay, yeah? But you also got involved with First Cape, which is, been a huge brand, isn't it? I mean, you're no longer involved with either. You've sold your shares in both of them now. But I just wonder, what are the keys to making a kind of big blend, a big brand work? I mean, is it all about making the sums add up? I mean, what's it like dealing with wines of that sort of size in terms of the blends?
Yeah, it is a very different type of winemaking. I think it taught me a lot about blending. I think I became, great at blending through that experience as well. And it's different wines. It's more varietal wines. There's no focus on sense of place or anything like that. And it's more than trying to make the best wine. You're trying to make the best wine for millions of people. It has to have that kind of appeal.
And to a price, yeah.
To a price, yeah.
Yeah.
And just learning through blending as well, that you could take a number of ordinary components and still come out with something quite spectacular. So, that whole synergy of blending was really kind of shown to me. Yeah.
I mean, one of the good things about both those businesses is that they were profitable and they allowed you to buy more land and plant more vineyards. Just tell us, how many hectares do you have now, and when did you plant the different bits of the business?
Well, we started with our first plantings 2002, and it was graduated as well. We eventually planted the farm, which we call Newton Johnson, where the winery is, on the north-facing slope. We've got 13 hectares. And we've got our other little farm just adjacent called Sanford on the southern slope, which has got 6 hectares, so 19 in total. And 20 years ago, we didn't have any idea. We kind of did what every other winery in South Africa did. You planted a whole fruit salad and kind of saw what was going to what was going to be good or not. And it was only over time that we built our reputation, especially with Pinot, that we started to make changes to the vineyard. I'm now really busy making changes to the vineyards. We've got more experience of farming them. We know where the good sites are, and I'm kind of adjusting the borders of our single vineyards like Sea Dragon and Windensea as well, because I think there can be more made from them. And then there's other parts of the farm as well, which is not well suited for Pinot and Chardonnay. Very little clay. We've got a few Rhone varieties right at the bottom of our Newton Johnson farm, which is, it looks like Chateauneuf-du-Pape. It's just all this stone, and we just knew, Burgundy varieties can't grow in that. So, it's been good the last 20 years of having the experience with the vineyards to be able to have a vision for going forward and what we want to do.
Make single vineyard wines from the start. They've sort of grown out of the plantings that you had, and as you've seen those develop.
Yeah, that's how I've seen Pinot on the farm really develop. Is the first 10 years they are more awkward wines or young wines, more variety expression of Pinot. And after 10 years, we started to see the vineyards mature, the wines change. And it was really about 15 years old that the discussion started to begin with the family of going, there's some of these vineyards that look much better on their own instead of being put into a blend. And I think this is the way forward. These are our crews that we should be concentrating on.
Just tell us a little bit about your approach to farming and whether it's changed over the years. And whether you're having to adapt to climate change and all of the challenges it brings. This year you had a very wet year, didn't you? Vintages, it's not just heat and earlier vintages, it's climate chaos in a sense. How are you adapting your farming?
Well, right now, I say we've got a pretty organic approach in our farming. I'm always prepared to take calculated risks and still getting a handle on it. So, no herbicides and no pesticides. I think we will use systemic fungicides every now and again if there's high disease pressure, like this year that we've just had. And, now seeing, how the weather has changed. It does feel different for me. It does feel more erratic. Spikes of rain or heat. And I think we started really to make changes after the drought years, 2015 to 2017. And even after the drought years, I could see the vines were just a little bit out of sync. I heard someone say they've got a hangover, and they've got to kind of work their way out through it. And we've changed the way we're pruning as well. So, just about every South African has always used cordon pruning in the past. And we're totally going over to Guyot now. We need the fertility in the canes as well. I really like it because it makes less cuts on the vine as well. So it's respecting more the vascular flow of the vine. We've changed our rootstocks, using more vigorous rootstocks. There's a South African one here that is well suited to acidic soils, which is essentially what most Cape soils are, is quite acidic. And row direction as well, planting where we can, if the slope allows us to do more east-west rows rather than north-south. And that was kind of the old, knowledge of 20, 30 years ago, is that you needed north-south direction rows to have full sun, morning sun and full afternoon sun. And I'm finding better wines are planted our Sanford vineyard east-west, but the sun literally goes over the top of the canopy and very rarely gets direct sunlight onto the bunch zone. So I really open it up, so take away leaves. It gets indirect sun, gets some light in just to ripen the tannins. And then also helps for those wet years as well, that you've got a nice airy canopy.
Very interesting. How many different wines do you make now? I mean, you've got quite an unusual portfolio. It's obviously Pinot and Chardonnay based, but you've got Rhone varieties and you've got Albarino, right?
We've now got 10 wines in the lineup. Most of them Chardonnay and Pinot, where we've got, similar to Burgundy in a way. We've got different levels of quality, building all the way up to our Sea Dragon and Wind and Sea Cruise. Those are our two.
So sort of village Premier Cru, Grand Cru in a way, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. Our Walker Bay for us, I say is a great introduction into the valley. It's a great introduction to our style, but also just the way Pinot reacts within the valley. It's going to give you a good feel for what the valley does. And same with the Chardonnay as well. And we were always looking for an alternative white variety that would find its home here in the valley with us, especially on parcels of soil where there's no clay. It's all pretty free draining. And Albarino ticked all those boxes, as maritime granite soil in Galicia, good rainfall, and it's been a great journey with that grape. We started making that, we had to import the vine material and made our first wines in 2013. And with the Rhone varieties, I mean, they also started 20 years ago, but they've been whittled out to only the best sites. We've subsequently found there's some sites where we planted some Syrah, which, it should be Pinot and Chardonnay. So it was a spread in the beginning in 20 years ago, and now I think we're finding our way forward.
You talked about your approach in the vineyard. Tell us a bit about your approach in the cellar. You're pretty hands-off, and I always think of you as a very gentle winemaker, and maybe I've got that wrong, have I? But it seems that way to me.
You haven't seen me in harvest, a dirty, sweaty little mongrel stuffing their hands in drains and things. I mean, I think our winemaking has changed quite a bit over the last 15 years or so. I'd say we were pretty conventional 15, 20 years ago. And where we are now, we've kind of thrown off the shackles, you could say, and I like to say we're trying to make the most from the grape itself. So no use of sulfur before the fermentations, because we want the spontaneous fermentations to be free. We want all species of natural yeast that might be there to have a part in the fermentation. And after 2015, after Nadia and I went to Burgundy, we just came back, and then for whatever reason, we were just so inspired. We just said we're not doing any filtration anymore. So we've kind of thrown off a lot of our previous winemaking of additions and tannins and enzymes. Those are all gone. And, now it's about, making sure that we're doing the job right in the vineyard. And, during the winery, I'm most of the time at the end of the sorting table, making sure of whatever goes into the tank is in great condition for what we want to do. Yeah. It's a lot of risk, but it's worthwhile.
I mean, it's quite unusual to have a husband and wife winemaking team. I mean, tell me a couple of things. First, how did you guys meet? Yeah. And you've seemed like a very good team. Are your skills complementary in terms of what you do in the cellar and the way you taste, the way you think about wine?
Very much so. Nadia and I met in 2004. She was doing a stage, an internship at Hamilton Russell, and I was on the prowl. And managed to bag her.
Smart move.
Yeah. And then she actually went for 2 years. She worked at Crook Constantia with Bula Gerber, who's now just moved over to the States. And then I convinced her to come and work with me in the winery. We've got very different skill sets. I'm probably more the dreamer and the one that thinks up ideas and wants to try weird stuff. And she's got the analysis. She can take a decision and whittle it down into the black and white and make sure that we're doing the right thing. So two very different approaches, but I think the biggest thing for us is that we've got the same palate, and I think that makes all the difference. And it's great having tasting sessions with her that, we're just on the same wavelengths when it comes to wines and picking something up. So you've got two minds on the wine. One might pick up something a little bit easier than the other, and, it works.
Yeah, your elder brother, Bevan, is involved in the business, and also your dad, and your mum. I mean, it's very much a family business. It seems to me to be a harmonious family business. What's the secret of that?
Well, I won't lie and say we didn't have any bust-ups in the past, especially two brothers. Nadia's still working with me in the cellar, but she is now starting to make some of her own wines, and I think it was the right time with the kids that are older now as well, that she just gets some independence and tries to do what she wants to do. And with the rest of the families, I think we're kind of old hat at the family business now. We've been through all the ups and downs, and I think probably the real secret is being family, being so familiar with each other. It's easy to lose your emotions and at work or in a professional atmosphere. So for me, that's the key is make sure you hold those negative emotions for the right time. But the good emotions that come from it, are, without comparison, and that you've got to use. You won't find that in a normal business. And I think
you've got to bottle the secret of it and sell it, I think.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, because they've been two of the great success stories, I think, of the new South Africa post-94 in many ways. I mean, why is that? Is it better clonal material? Is it just being able to plant in better places? Is it better winemaking? Is it the fact you've travelled more? Is it all of those things? I don't know.
It's a little bit of everything, in fact. But I think the big turnaround was the introduction of new vine material with Raymond Bernard's Dijon clones that came in. And you really started to see those as I was starting in the wine industry in 97. I think maybe Hamilton Russell used a little bit in 95. But at the time, all the Pinot producers were using the old BK5 clone, the old Swiss bubbly clone.
Which is a sparkling wine clone, yeah?
A sparkling clone, so not really made for red wines. Yeah. They made some charming wines, and, you can still find some old ones that are lovely. They just didn't have the gravitas that the Dijon clones brought. And, at the time when we were starting to make Pinot for the first time, Hamilton Russell had started with their Pinot Noir workshops. And, if there were 20 producers or, some of them were garage winemakers as well, that was a lot. There weren't many producers around. So, there wasn't a large brains trust of Pinot. And, that has definitely changed in the last 20 years. There's a lot more Pinot around. There's a lot more producers in the valley. So this whole brains trust, I think, has grown and really helped helped everyone to specialize, I think, in these two varieties in the valley. Even Hamilton Russell, when they started, were making, I think Tim wanted to plant Cab and they had some Chenin, and they slowly, found their focus, and I think so is everyone else. Yeah.
Tell us about one of the other things you do, which is your chair of the Cape Winemakers Guild. Yeah. Sounds terribly grand. I know you're very popular. You're a very popular chairman. Just tell us, what does the Cape Winemakers Guild do exactly?
The Cape Winemakers Guild started in the mid-'80s, which when you started to get your first estate winemakers, your first small premium winemakers. Before that, the industry was largely concentrated on big cooperative wineries. So this was a little bit of a start, and they started with the eye on tasting with each other, sharing ideas, inspiring each other. And, that's grown into what it is today, where we are about, I think, 41 or 42 members of the guild from all over the Cape, all different areas, different specialities, and, really just trying to push the envelope with South African wine, tasting the great wines out there and making, seeing if we are, up to the game or not. And another big part of it as well, certainly with South Africa's history, is trying to get the younger generation, help that younger generation have a bit more easier entry into the wine industry. I mean, we've got kids from so many different backgrounds that are now getting into winemaking. They don't have all the resources. They don't have all the connections. So they are part of what we call the protege program, where they spend 3 years within the guild's members, work with the members, come to the tastings, taste the wines, and they get all kinds of training, even training for being a good speaker, and just giving them all the skills to really go out there and compete on the world stage.
Yeah, it's been a great thing, particularly for people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I mean, often people of colour, not exclusively, but I think it's really brought on the next generation of winemakers who are really exciting already. I think a lot of them are achieving great things.
Yeah, and it's going to help the wine culture really spread to all the populations within South Africa as well. Yeah. And, start building a Xhosa vocabulary in wine, or a Zulu vocabulary in wine, and just starting to build the culture of drinking wine with your food. And it's something that's been lacking.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you about is about the kind of fine wine sector. I mean, lots of people say, people who don't know South Africa say, it hasn't really got a fine wine sector. Is that changing, that perception, particularly in places like the States, where people don't think of South Africa as a fine wine producer? But you've done a lot to help change that, I think, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's still growing. I mean, on the whole, South Africans' vineyards are shrinking with every year. They are getting smaller. It's still very much it was based very much on the history of bulk winemaking, making bulk wines. And I think a lot of farmers are starting to find more profitable crops, don't want to be in it anymore. It's too hard to market or to sell your wines. And I think that's left the door open for the premium sector really to grow. I mean, just looking at the Swartland as well, of how they've taken a cooperative area and really changed it into a burgeoning premium area. So I think that trend's going to continue. As long as I think we put the effort into our research, into our academics, I think that'll continue. You'll see a bigger and bigger premium sector.
Yeah, but I think, there's got to be a market for bigger wines in terms of bulk producers and brands. But surely the profitability is in the middle tier and the upper tier, isn't it?
Absolutely. With costs, I think that's the biggest pressure being put on farmers now, is just the inflation and the rise of costs. I think we in South Africa are quite used to inflation. We've usually got a level of about 7%.
Join the club.
UK is now experiencing.
Yeah.
So I think that the cost of farming has really put pressure on those farmers, and it's really only the premium sector that can match that.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
A good profitable business. Yeah.
Listen, final question. How do you get away from wine? You've got a busy life, you've got a family, you're running the Cape Winemakers Guild. Are you still a surfer? Is the Durban boy still within you?
Yeah. No, still a surfer. Happily, I mean, I'm 15 minutes away from the beach. So, if I do find a gap, we'll go down and go have a surf. It clears the head. And, there's a great bunch of winemakers that surf as well. So, we get together and we go on surf trips, and, guys like Duncan and Eben and my brother and Miles. And, it's a great camaraderie that we've built, I think, within the wine industry, even having something that we call the Vintners Classic, a little bit of a fun day, a surfing competition, which is now 20 years old. All started because none of us could play golf for any of the sponsor open days. So we started a surfing competition, and it's going fantastically well.
And when's the next one?
Next one is in first or second week of August.
Damn, I'll be back by then. Otherwise, to come and watch, I think.
It's good fun. It's a bit messy, but it's good fun.
Well, that sounds great. Listen, Gordy, it's fantastic talking to you. Love your wines. See you very soon. In fact, I'll see you next week.
Super. Great stuff. Thanks, Tim.
See ya.
All right. Ciao.
Lovely guy, Gordy, with an artist's touch in the cellar. And I love what he's doing as chairman of the Cape Winemakers Guild. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Gavin Quinney from Chateau Bauduc in Bordeaux. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.